We gather here today to honor a legacy of courage and freedom.
December 25th, 1995. Christmas morning in Beverly Hills. While families across America opened presents and shared laughter, Frank Sinatra sat alone in his study, staring at a telephone that wouldn't stop ringing. Dean Martin had died on Christmas morning. His best friend of 47 years was gone. The funeral was scheduled for 3 days later, and everyone expected Frank to be there. The chairman of the board, the leader of the Rat Pack, Dean's closest friend in the world. But Frank Sinatra didn't go to Dean Martin's funeral. The world was shocked. The media called it a betrayal. Frank's own daughter begged him to reconsider. But what really happened in those 3 days, and what Frank did instead, would break your heart and change everything you thought you knew about friendship, grief, and loyalty. Before we dive into this devastating story of friendship and loss, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This isn't just about two Hollywood legends. It's about the kind of bond that transcends everything, even death. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and let's uncover the truth together. The friendship that defined an era. To understand why Frank's absence devastated so many people, you need to understand what Dean Martin meant to him. These weren't just colleagues or casual friends. For nearly 5 decades, they were brothers in every way that mattered except blood. They met in 1945 at a nightclub in New York City. Frank was already a rising star, the skinny kid from Hoboken whose voice made Bobby Soxers faint. Dean was still Dino Crocetti, the son of Italian immigrants from Ohio, trying to make it as a singer and comedian. The chemistry was instant. They shared the same working-class Italian roots, the same hunger for success, and the same understanding that in show business, loyalty was everything. Through the 1950s and 60s, Frank and Dean became the heart of the Rat Pack, that legendary group of entertainers who ruled Las Vegas and Hollywood. While Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop completed the group, everyone knew the real core was Frank and Dean. They performed together. They partied together. They made movies together. They were in each other's weddings. They were godfathers to each other's children. But it went deeper than fame and fun. When Frank's son was kidnapped in 1963, Dean was the first person at his door, cash in hand, ready to help pay the ransom. When Dean's son Dean Paul died in a plane crash in 1987, Frank held him while he sobbed. One of the few times anyone ever saw Dean Martin cry. The cracks that started to show. The last few years of their friendship had been complicated. Dean had withdrawn from public life after his son's death. The man who'd always been the cool, easygoing member of the Rat Pack became a recluse. He stopped performing. He stopped going to parties. He spent most days alone in his Beverly Hills mansion, smoking cigarettes and watching old westerns on television. Frank tried to reach out. He called constantly. He sent friends to check on Dean. He even showed up at Dean's house unannounced, demanding to be let in. But Dean had built walls that even Frank couldn't break through. Their last conversation had been 6 months before Dean's death. Frank had called to invite Dean to his 80th birthday celebration in December. Dean's response was short and final. "I'm done with all that, Frank. I'm tired. Let me rest." Frank had hung up feeling helpless and angry. Angry at Dean for giving up. Angry at himself for not knowing how to help. Angry at the world for taking away the easy joy that had once defined their friendship. December 25th, 1995. Dean Martin died at 3:30 a.m. on Christmas morning. He was 78 years old. The official cause was acute respiratory failure, but everyone who knew him understood the real cause. A broken heart that had never healed after his son's death 8 years earlier. Frank got the call at 4:15 a.m. His daughter Tina was on the line, her voice shaking. "Dad, it's Dean. He's gone." Frank didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he hung up the phone and sat down in his study. His wife Barbara found him there an hour later, still sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. The funeral was scheduled for December 28th at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery. It would be a private ceremony, just family and close friends. The media was already camped outside the funeral home. Everyone wanted to see the Rat Pack say goodbye to one of their own. Everyone assumed Frank would be there. How could he not be? This was Dean Martin, his best friend, his partner, his brother. Missing the funeral was unthinkable. The pressure builds. Over the next 3 days, the phone at Frank's house rang constantly. Friends called to confirm he'd be there. Reporters called asking for statements. Even Frank's own children called, urging him to attend. Tina Sinatra begged her father, "Dad, you have to go. People are expecting you. Dean would want you there." Frank's response was barely audible. Dean knew what he meant to me. I don't need a funeral to prove it. But the pressure kept building. The newspapers were already writing stories about the funeral. Television stations were planning special coverage. Everyone wanted to capture the moment when Frank Sinatra said goodbye to Dean Martin. What nobody knew was that Frank was falling apart. At 80 years old, his health was failing. He'd had multiple heart attacks. His memory was slipping. Some days, he barely recognized his own family. But more than that, he was drowning in a grief so profound that he couldn't imagine standing at a graveside surrounded by cameras and crowds, expected to perform his sorrow for the world. The decision. On the morning of December 28th, Frank made his decision. He wouldn't attend the funeral. His family was shocked. His friends were confused. The media was already writing headlines calling it a betrayal. But Frank had something else in mind. Something private. Something that would honor his friendship with Dean in a way that no public funeral ever could. What Frank did instead would remain mostly hidden from the world for years. But for those who knew the truth, it was the most devastating display of love and loyalty they'd ever witnessed. The public backlash. The day of Dean's funeral arrived cold and gray in Los Angeles. Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery was packed with mourners. Dean's children were there. Dean Paul's widow, his daughters Gail, Deanna, and Gina, his son Richie. Friends from Hollywood showed up to pay their respects. Shirley MacLaine came. Sammy Davis Jr. had died 5 years earlier, but his widow was there representing his memory. But the person everyone was looking for wasn't there. Frank Sinatra's absence was the elephant at the funeral. Impossible to ignore, painful to acknowledge. The media had a field day. "Where's Frank?" the headlines screamed. Sinatra abandons old friend. The chairman skips Dean's final show. Television commentators speculated about bad blood between the two legends. Radio hosts took calls from angry fans who felt betrayed. Some people were cruel. Frank always thought he was better than everyone else. Too good to say goodbye to an old friend. Others tried to be understanding. Maybe he's too sick to travel. He's 80 years old after all. But most people were just confused and hurt. How could Frank Sinatra, the man who'd built his entire image on loyalty and friendship, miss Dean Martin's funeral? What they didn't know about Frank's condition. What the public didn't see was Frank Sinatra sitting in his study on the morning of the funeral, trying to get dressed and failing. His hands shook too badly to button his shirt. His legs felt like concrete. His mind kept drifting. One moment he was in 1995, the next he was back in 1960, performing with Dean at the Sands Hotel in Vegas, both of them young and invincible. Barbara Sinatra watched her husband struggle with growing alarm. "Frank, maybe you should lie down. You don't look well." Frank shook his head stubbornly. "I'm fine. I need a minute." But he wasn't fine. The truth was that Frank had been hiding the extent of his physical and mental decline from everyone except Barbara. He'd had a series of small strokes over the past year. His memory was failing rapidly. Some days, he didn't recognize his own children when they visited. His doctors had been clear. Any major stress could trigger another stroke, possibly a fatal one. Attending a funeral, with its emotional weight, the crowds, the cameras, the expectation that he'd deliver some perfect eulogy, could literally kill him. But Frank didn't tell anyone this. He was Frank Sinatra, the chairman of the board. Leaders don't show weakness. Legends don't admit they're falling apart. The weight of 47 years. As the funeral proceeded without him, Frank sat alone in his study, surrounded by memories of Dean. Photographs covered the walls, the two of them in their prime, performing in Vegas. On movie sets, at each other's weddings, holding each other's children. Frank picked up a framed photo from 1958. It showed him and Dean on the set of Some Came Running, both of them laughing at something off camera. They looked so young, so full of life, so certain that the good times would never end. The memories came flooding back, overwhelming in their intensity. He remembered the night in 1965 when Dean's wife Jean had called him at 2 a.m. Dean had been in a car accident. Frank had rushed to the hospital, prepared for the worst, only to find Dean sitting up in bed, bruised but joking. "Pally, you should see the other guy. He looks worse than you do in the morning." He remembered Dean's 50th birthday party, when Frank had arranged for a full orchestra to surprise him with "Everybody Loves Somebody." Dean had cried, actually cried, and then punched Frank in the arm. "You're a pain in the ass, you know that?" He remembered the darker times too. The night Dean's son Dean Paul died in that plane crash. Frank had gotten the call and driven straight to Dean's house, breaking every speed limit. He'd found Dean sitting in the dark, completely silent, staring at a photograph of his boy. Frank had sat beside him without saying a word, just being there, because there were no words that could fix that kind of pain. That was the beginning of the end for Dean. He'd never recovered from losing his son. The spark that made him the king of cool just went out. He finished his contract obligations, then retreated from the world entirely. The guilt Frank carried. As Frank sat there on the morning of the funeral, he was consumed by a guilt that had been building for 8 years. He felt like he'd failed Dean, like he should have done more after Dean Paul died, should have broken down those walls, should have forced Dean to keep living instead of letting him slowly die of a broken heart. Frank had replayed their last phone conversation hundreds of times. "I'm done with all that, Frank. I'm tired. Let me rest." Why hadn't he driven over there? Why hadn't he refused to accept that answer? Why had he let Dean push him away? Now Dean was gone, and Frank would never get another chance to tell him all the things he should have said. That he loved him like a brother. That those 47 years of friendship had been the best part of his life. That he was sorry, so desperately sorry, for not being able to save him from his grief. The funeral was happening right now, just a few miles away. Frank could hear his own voice in his head, angry and mocking. "You coward. You're sitting here feeling sorry for yourself while they bury your best friend. Get up. Get dressed. Go say goodbye like a man." But Frank physically couldn't do it. His body wouldn't cooperate. His mind wouldn't cooperate. And more than that, he couldn't bear the thought of standing at Dean's graveside surrounded by cameras and strangers, expected to reduce 47 years of brotherhood to a few sound bites for the evening news. What Frank did instead. While the funeral proceeded at Westwood Village Memorial Park, Frank made a phone call to his driver. "Tony, I need you to take me somewhere. And I need you to keep this quiet." An hour later, Frank was in the backseat of his car, wearing dark sunglasses and a hat pulled low. Tony drove him through the streets of Beverly Hills to a place Frank hadn't visited in months, Dean Martin's house. The mansion was empty. Dean's family was at the funeral. The staff had been given the day off. Frank had Tony let him in with the spare key he'd kept for years, a key Dean had given him decades ago with a simple instruction. "If something ever happens to me and you need to get in, use this." Frank walked through Dean's house alone. He moved slowly through the rooms, touching the furniture, looking at the photographs on the walls, remembering. This was where they'd celebrated birthdays, watched football games, shared countless bottles of Jack Daniels and endless hours of laughter. In Dean's study, Frank found what he was looking for: Dean's record player and his collection of albums. Frank pulled out a record, one of his own, In the Wee Small Hours, and put it on the turntable. As his own voice filled the empty house, singing songs about loneliness and loss, Frank Sinatra broke down completely. He sobbed, deep, wrenching sobs that shook his entire body. There were no cameras, no reporters, no expectations. Just Frank and his grief and the ghost of his best friend in every corner of that silent house. He cried for Dean. He cried for himself. He cried for all the years they'd had and all the years they'd never have. He cried for Dean Paul and for every loss that had brought them to this moment. Tony found him an hour later, sitting in Dean's chair, still crying, the record playing on repeat. "Mr. S," Tony said gently. "We should go. The family will be back soon." Frank nodded but didn't move. He was staring at a photograph on Dean's desk, the two of them from 1960, arms around each other's shoulders, both grinning at the camera like they owned the world. Finally, Frank stood up. He took the photograph and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Then he did something that would become legendary among the few people who knew the truth. He wrote Dean a letter. The letter. Frank found paper and a pen in Dean's study. His hands shook as he wrote, his usually elegant handwriting reduced to a shaky scrawl. But he wrote anyway, pouring out everything he couldn't say at a public funeral. The letter read, "Dino, I couldn't do it, pal. I couldn't stand there at your grave with all those cameras and strangers and pretend that I could sum up what you meant to me in a few pretty words. You'd understand that. You always understood me better than anyone. I'm sitting in your house right now, in your chair, listening to records like we used to. Remember all those nights we'd sit up late, just the two of us, drinking Jack and arguing about whether DiMaggio or Mantle was the better ball player. You always picked Mantle just to annoy me. I'm going to miss those arguments, Dino. I should have come to see you more these last few years. After Dean Paul died, I should have broken down your door and dragged you back to the world. I knew you were hurting, but I let you push me away. I thought I was giving you space. Now I think I was just being a coward. You were the best friend I ever had. Not because we performed together or because we were famous together, but because you never let me get away with my own bullshit. When I was too full of myself, you'd cut me down with one joke. When I was hurting, you'd sit with me without making me talk about it. You were real in a world full of phonies. I'm not doing so good myself these days, pal. My mind's going. Some days I can't remember where I am or what year it is. But I remember you. I remember everything about our friendship. Those memories are the best thing I have. I wish I'd told you this while you were here. I loved you, Dino. Like a brother. Like family. You made my life better just by being in it. Rest easy, Pally. Save me a seat at the bar wherever you are. Your friend always. Frank. Frank folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope. He left it on Dean's desk where Dean's children would find it. Then he took one last look around the house, said goodbye to the empty rooms, and let Tony drive him home. The truth comes out. For years, very few people knew what Frank had done that day. His daughter Tina eventually learned about it from Tony the driver. Dean's daughter Deanna found the letter and kept it private for nearly a decade before sharing the story. When the truth finally came out, it changed everything. People who'd been angry at Frank for missing the funeral suddenly understood. This wasn't a betrayal. This was a man so devastated by loss that he couldn't perform his grief for public consumption. Frank had chosen to honor Dean in the only way that felt authentic to him. Privately, intimately, in the space where their friendship had lived for decades. The final year. After Dean's death, Frank's decline accelerated. His family later said that losing Dean broke something in him that never healed. He'd already lost Sammy Davis Jr. in 1990. Now Dean was gone too. The Rat Pack, that symbol of eternal youth and invincibility, was reduced to memories and old recordings. Frank continued to have health problems. His memory got worse. He stopped performing. He spent most of his time at home, surrounded by family, listening to music. But according to those closest to him, Frank talked about Dean constantly in that final year. He'd tell stories about their adventures, laughing at memories that were 50 years old. He'd pull out that photograph he'd taken from Dean's house and just stare at it, lost in the past. Tina Sinatra said her father kept Dean's photograph on his nightstand until the day he died. It was the last thing he looked at before he went to sleep, and the first thing he looked for when he woke up. May 14th, 1998. Frank Sinatra died on May 14th, 1998, just 2.5 years after Dean. He was 82 years old. The official cause was a heart attack, but his family knew better. Like Dean, Frank had died of accumulated losses, the weight of outliving too many friends, losing too many people, existing in a world that no longer felt like home. At Frank's funeral, Tina Sinatra shared the story of what her father had done on the day of Dean's funeral. She read excerpts from the letter Frank had written. There wasn't a dry eye in the church. My father loved Dean Martin more than most people understood, Tina said. He didn't skip the funeral because he didn't care. He skipped it because he cared too much. Because some grief is too private, too profound, to perform for cameras. She paused, tears streaming down her face. Dad always said that Dean understood him better than anyone. And in the end, I think Dean did understand. I think Dean knew exactly why Dad couldn't be there that day. The final message after Frank died, his family found something in his study. A sealed envelope addressed to Dean Martin, never sent. Inside was a new letter, written just weeks before Frank's death. His handwriting was barely legible, the words wandering across the page, but the message was clear. Dino, I'll see you soon, pal. Save that seat for me. We've got a lot to catch up on. Your friend, Frank. The letter was buried with Frank, tucked into his jacket pocket, right next to the photograph of him and Dean from 1960. Two friends with their arms around each other, grinning like the world belonged to them. In a way, it did. The truth about friendship and grief. The story of Frank Sinatra missing Dean Martin's funeral teaches us something profound about love, loyalty, and loss. For years, people judged Frank harshly for his absence. They saw it as abandonment, as cowardice, as a failure of friendship. But the truth was exactly the opposite. Frank's absence was an act of love so profound that most people couldn't comprehend it. He understood that his grief was too big, too private, too sacred to be reduced to a sound bite on the evening news. He knew that 47 years of brotherhood couldn't be honored with a 3-minute eulogy delivered to a crowd of strangers and cameras. Instead, Frank chose to say goodbye in the most intimate way possible, alone, in the space where their friendship had lived, speaking words that were meant only for Dean. The lesson about performing grief. We live in a world that expects us to perform our emotions publicly. Social media has turned grief into content. We're expected to share our pain, to document our losses, to prove our love through public displays. But Frank Sinatra's story reminds us that the deepest emotions don't always translate to public performance. Sometimes the most authentic way to honor someone is privately, intimately, without witnesses or cameras. There's no right way to grieve. There's no rule that says you have to attend a funeral to prove you loved someone. Sometimes the truest expressions of love happen in silence, in solitude, in moments that belong only to you and the person you've lost. The power of real friendship. The friendship between Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin lasted 47 years, through fame and failure, joy and tragedy, youth and old age. That kind of friendship doesn't end because one person dies. It continues in memory, in photographs, in letters written to someone who can't read them anymore. Frank carried Dean with him every day after that funeral. The photograph on his nightstand. The stories he told. The letter he wrote just before his own death, still talking to his friend as if Dean could hear him. That's what real friendship looks like. Not grand gestures for public consumption, but quiet loyalty that persists even after death. The reunion. There's a beautiful postscript to this story. Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin are both buried at Desert Memorial Park in Cathedral City, California. Their graves are close together, close enough that you can stand between them and touch both headstones. Frank's family chose that location specifically so he could be near Dean. Even in death, they didn't want the two friends separated. Visitors to the cemetery often leave Jack Daniels bottles at both graves, a tribute to all those nights the two friends spent together, drinking and laughing and being young. On Frank's headstone, his family included a quote that seems to speak directly to Dean. "The best is yet to come." Maybe Frank was right. Maybe somewhere beyond this world, there's a bar where Frank and Dean are sitting together, arguing about baseball, telling old stories, laughing like they're young again. Maybe death wasn't the end of their friendship. Maybe it was just intermission. What we can learn this story teaches us several vital lessons about life, friendship, and loss. 1. Judge less. Understand more ***. When someone grieves differently than you expect, don't assume it means they don't care. Some people need privacy. Some people need solitude. That's okay. 2. Real love doesn't require witnesses ***. The most profound expressions of love often happen away from cameras and crowds. You don't need to perform your emotions to prove they're real. 3. Friendship transcends death. When you truly love someone, they never really leave you. They live on in your memories, in your stories, in the way they shaped who you became. 4. It's okay to fall apart. Frank Sinatra was one of the most powerful men in entertainment history. But when Dean died, Frank fell apart completely. And that's human. That's real. There's no shame in being broken by loss. 5. Express your love while you can. Frank's biggest regret was not telling Dean how much he meant to him while Dean was alive. Don't wait. Tell the people you love what they mean to you. Today. Now. Before it's too late. Your turn to act. If this story moved you, there's something you can do right now. Think of someone in your life who matters to you. A friend, a family member, someone who's made your life better just by being in it. Pick up your phone and tell them. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't worry about sounding sentimental. Just tell them they matter. Because someday one of you will be gone, and you'll wish you'd said it while you had the chance. Final thoughts. Frank Sinatra didn't go to Dean Martin's funeral. The world saw it as a betrayal. But those who knew the truth understood. Frank honored Dean in the most authentic way he knew how. Not with public performance, but with private devastation. Not with carefully chosen words for cameras, but with a letter written in a shaking hand to a friend who couldn't read it. That's love. Real, messy, imperfect, devastating love. And maybe that's the most important lesson of all. The truest expressions of love don't always look the way we expect them to. Sometimes they look like absence. Sometimes they look like silence. Sometimes they look like a man sitting alone in his dead friend's house, crying his heart out where no one can see. Frank and Dean's friendship didn't end at that funeral Frank missed. It continues in the stories we tell, in the music they left behind, in the reminder that real friendship, the kind that lasts a lifetime and beyond, doesn't need public validation. It just needs to be real. If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that grief has no rules and love has no schedule. And please take a moment today to tell someone they matter to you. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had to grieve in your own way, different from what people expected? Share your story. You might help someone else feel less alone. The best is yet to come, friends. For Frank, for Dean, and for all of us who love them. See you in the next video, where we'll explore more untold stories of Hollywood's golden age.